This video is sponsored by Real Vision.
These days you hear about modern monetary theory everywhere in the media. Politicians, finance professionals, media personalities, everybody has an opinion. So many people are talking about it, but very few are actually defining what it is. So we're gonna explain what modern monetary theory is in this week's episode of Real Vision's The One Thing. What's going on, investors? AK here. Modern monetary theory, or MMT, is all the rage these days, but it's not a new idea. It's been around for over 100 years in one form or another. Recently, Sridhar Vadanthai, the director of research at the Jerome Levy Forecasting Center, sat down with Michael Green to discuss MMT.
I mean, at the end of the day, the issue is this, right? Money is technically not scarce. We can always print as much as we want. But it has value only because it is scarce. You and I work and give our labor because to earn the money, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to get that hold of that money, right? If it could be printed freely, then there would be no incentive to do any work, right? But there is a big gap between those two extremes, right? And the idea of a society is to how do you balance between the extremes where money is not scarce, but you want to exploit the fact that it is perceived as being scarce, right? You want to perceive value of scarcity, you want to maintain that without it losing it, right? But at some point, if you keep doing it, printing money, it will become scarce, which is hyperinflation. But it's not necessarily, it will lose its scarce. But that trick is hard to do, right? I mean, that's why a lot of people ultimately come down to talking about what's the inflation. And the MMT people will tell you inflation is the constraint. The key issue really is, which nobody really talks about, is we don't really trust you guys that you will really care about inflation when inflation actually meets you at the door, because most people say, no, inflation hurts. If you're going to clamp down on inflation, it'll create unemployment, it'll hurt a lot of poor people. And so there will always be some pushback against it. And that's really the issue that nobody wants to discuss. What are the mechanisms for inflation? How are you going to control it? And we don't trust you.
As Sri said, MMT is predicated on maintaining a balance between economic perception and economic reality. But how does that work in practice? Well, here's Sri again to explain.
What's happening here is when you hit that kind of a balance sheet limit and the economy has become top heavy, balance sheets are large, the tail is wagging the dog. The balance sheets are driving the economy. Right? So you need to stabilize the balance sheet structures first, which is why you drop interest rates. Secondly, you now need to reflate the balance sheet structures to be able to kickstart the economy, which is what they try to do. Right? Now, normally, if you want to have a healthy economy, which is where I have some sympathy for what MMT guys say, is you need to run fiscal stimulus. If you did a fiscal stimulus, then you would be able to get out of this jail, because that goes directly injecting demand into the economy, right? Whereas with monetary policy, you're doing it very indirectly, because cost of capital is not an important factor, except for housing. What you are doing is you are trying to reflate balance sheets, make debt more easy to carry, and through that you are trying to induce people to go and expand their balance sheets further, which is not so you're actually making the problem worse.
MMT proponents argue that because the government can print as much money as they want, that they can create fiscal stimulus by expanding their balance sheet. And the kicker is that debt doesn't even matter. Sri did mention a problem with MMT though. Let's hear from him again.
So when you make the problem worse in that framework, right? Is there an escape? Can you solve this problem? Do you have to go full MMT and run a massive fiscal deficit to generate the income?
Right. You see, which is what we have done in this cycle, really, which successfully to some extent, right? We've been running massive deficits since 2008. The problem with doing that, though, is when you run massive fiscal deficits, but you don't constrain the private sector, if profits are very strong and the private sector is doing well, there will be a natural inclination, and interest rates are low, there is natural inducement to expand balance sheets again. So then you end up with a big private sector balance sheet. You have not retrenched the private sector balance sheets. And you also end up with a big government balance sheet, and a big problem now.
As you can tell, Sri and Michael are skeptical, but there are other investment industry legends that have more passionate views on MMT. Check out this clip from Jeff Gunlag.
If we pass legislation like next year, maybe we could somehow reverse course, but we're not going to. We're going to go the other way.
Well, that kind of legislation is not going to get you any votes, let's face it.
Only gets you votes when the problem is out in plain sight and is hurting people right now.
Yeah.
And we're still in mega denial mode because we actually think that we can get richer by borrowing more. That's the message from the Democratic Socialist. Don't ask me how I'm going to pay for it. That's not even important. You're missing the real question. How are we going to divvy up the massive prosperity?
Right.
We're going to borrow our way to prosperity, which of course is nonsensical. Just think about that in your personal life.
But
Right?
that's the problem.
The more credit cards you get, the more wealthy you are,
Yeah,
sure.
But MMT, modern monetary theory, is gaining all kinds of traction. Wherever you look, it's suddenly become an incredibly hot topic, which we know it doesn't work. It can't work. You can't just spend your way into prosperity.
Sure, you can't drink yourself sober.
Right. But at a certain time in the cycle, which we seem to be at, it sounds great to a lot of people.
Right.
And they want to be told what to think.
Extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds.
That's exactly right.
And it's amazing how it happens. And Bitcoin was an example of that, I think. And now maybe we'll go all digital and all this down the line, something like this will work. But Bitcoin was not going to 1 million. You know, it was just ridiculous mania. And I think spending your way to prosperity is so blatantly idiotic, yet when you get groupthink going and everybody starts to repeat what they're told, this is what happens.
Can we drink ourselves sober? Well, I sure wish we could after St. Patty's Day last weekend. Now, there's a lot of reasons why MMT has gained so much popularity. I mean, who doesn't love free money, right? Though if government balance sheets and individual balance sheets use the same rules, then MMT kind of seems like a ludicrous sentiment. But in a world where a reality TV star is the president, LeBron James isn't making the playoffs, and Tom Brady is still the best quarterback in the NFL, well, hell, anything could happen. If you want to learn more about modern monetary theory so you could profit in this new economic environment, then make sure you subscribe to Real Vision. I'll talk to you next week.